Have I ever observed how certain individuals seem to view my personal development almost suspiciously? Regardless of the progress made, the struggles overcome, or the extent of healing achieved, they persistently attempt to tether me to my former self. They dwell on my past errors like replaying outdated episodes of a program I've long since surpassed, and perhaps I've questioned their motives. Why the inability to move forward? Well, allow me to share an uncomfortable reality. My growth often disquiets those who haven't confronted their own stagnation. When someone continuously resurrects my past, it isn't indicative of my lack of change. It reflects their own inertia. I am evolving, they remain static. And each forward step I take serves as a mirror, highlighting what they've chosen to ignore within themselves. They resist acknowledging the current me because doing so would necessitate abandoning the narrative where they maintained a sense of superiority. But I owe no one adherence to a version of myself I have already transcended. In today's discussion, I'm exploring precisely what it signifies when someone cannot cease reminding me of my past self and how to navigate beyond it without sacrificing my inner peace. Because the instant I stop defending my history and begin living authentically, that is the moment true personal power emerges. If I'm prepared to cease allowing old storylines to define me, I should hit that subscribe button and join this exploration. Let's break these constraints together. Number 1. They employ your past for control. One of the most insidious and damaging forms of manipulation originates from individuals who utilize my past, not for comprehension, but for dominance. This isn't dialogue, it isn't resolution. It's employed as a weapon. These are the individuals who witnessed me at my lowest points and now wield that knowledge like leverage. They might claim they're merely keeping me grounded, but their actual intent is to keep me contained. They seize upon my moments of weakness, my most vulnerable errors, and bring them forth whenever I start to ascend. Their motive isn't remembrance born of love or concern. It's to disrupt my progress, sow doubt where growth should flourish, and keep me bound to an obsolete version of myself. And without vigilance, this tactic proves effective. Here's the psychological underpinning. Shame constitutes a potent emotion. When someone evokes my past to activate that shame, they are essentially manipulating the very threads of my identity. They aim to maintain my emotional indebtedness, where I feel obligated to provide proof, apology, or conform to their expectations. Every attempt I make to advance is met by them pulling the leash of my history, reminding me, recall who you once were. However, Stoic wisdom imparts a radically liberating truth. I am under no obligation to be defined by anyone else's recollection of me. Epictetus stated, "Do not hand over your peace to the judgment of others." This isn't mere poetry. It holds profound psychological weight. Because the moment I permit someone else to dictate my worth through outdated narratives, they seize control of my present. They usurp my choices, my confidence, my voice. Consider a man who invested years rebuilding after reaching absolute rock bottom. Perhaps through addiction, financial devastation, or profound betrayal, he arduously reclaimed a better existence. Yet there's invariably someone present during the downfall, someone holding the metaphorical receipts. And each time this man progresses, launching a business, beginning a new relationship, establishing a boundary, that individual casts his past onto the table like an unpaid debt. Don't get ahead of yourself. You remember what happened last time? It doesn't sound malicious. It sounds rational. But beneath lies the message: I require you to remain in the position where I am comfortable perceiving you. The reason this tactic proves so potent is its disguise as concern. It appears to originate from someone intimately familiar, but genuine growth frequently terrifies those who remain emotionally stagnant. My transformation jeopardizes their sense of control. Their sole recourse to regain it involves pulling me back into emotional subservience. This is precisely where Stoicism functions not merely as philosophy, but as defense. It teaches that peace resides internally, and no one, not family, not old acquaintances, not even those privy to my darkest hours, possesses the right to exert dominion over my present self. So what is the appropriate response? I cease engaging in the debate. I stop justifying my growth. I refrain from seeking acknowledgement from those benefiting from my guilt. When someone weaponizes my past, the most formidable counter is calm indifference. Not coldness, but clarity. I know who I am. I know the trial survived. And if they refuse to acknowledge that, let them persist in their version of me. I no longer reside there. My life is not a courtroom necessitating perpetual arguments for my innocence. I am not here to earn liberation from my past. I already secured it the moment I enacted change. The individuals attempting to use my story against me are often those apprehensive about authoring their own. Let them remain where they are comfortable. I have nothing further to prove. If you found these insights valuable, let me know by commenting yes below. Your thoughts matter, and I'd love to hear from you. Number 2, they haven't healed themselves. There exists a poignant reality seldom discussed. Certain individuals will perpetually obstruct my evolution because they remain emotionally ensnared in the version of me that afforded them feelings of safety, superiority, or self-justification. They persistently reference my past, not to hold me accountable, but because my growth induces their discomfort. When someone constantly reminds me of my errors, misjudgments, or lowest periods, it seldom pertains to my current identity. It relates more profoundly to who they remain. Individuals who haven't undergone personal healing will instinctively attempt to draw me back into the iteration of myself that resonates with their unresolved traumas. That former self, perhaps reactive, disoriented, impulsive, felt familiar to them. They could manage their perception of that person, but now that I've transformed, now that I've progressed, they are confronted with a reality they are unready to accept. While I was evolving, they remained stationary. The Stoics understood this profoundly. Seneca once remarked, "He who clings to pain cannot walk forward." This isn't merely a poetic notion, it's a stark psychological truth. People who haven't processed their own suffering will unconsciously project it onto those around them. When someone clings tenaciously to the memory of my past failures, they aren't endeavoring to keep me humble. They are attempting to evade confronting their own stagnation. My healing transforms into a mirror, and they cannot endure the reflection. I've witnessed this unfold directly. Consider someone who has overcome addiction, built a new existence, discovered purpose, and shed a destructive lifestyle. Yet upon returning home for holidays or encountering old acquaintances, they are met with subtle barbs. "Remember when you used to," or dismissive remarks like, "You think you're superior now?" The underlying translation of these comments is, "I haven't changed, and your growth forces me to question why." That discomfort? It isn't my responsibility. It signals that my evolution has rendered their comfort zone uncomfortably restrictive. They resist my growth because it compels them to acknowledge the duration of their own emotional stasis. Here is where Stoicism transitions from mere philosophy to a practical tool for survival and flourishing. I owe no explanation to anyone insisting on anchoring me to my past. I need not participate in every emotional power struggle someone initiates. The Stoics taught that my locus of control resides in my own judgment, character, and choices, not their opinion, bitterness, or timeline. If someone persists in referencing my former self, let them. But I refuse to remain in that past alongside them. I am under no obligation to persuade them of my growth, because authentic change speaks for itself. My conduct, communication style, conflict resolution methods all testify more eloquently than their outdated narratives. I must protect my peace, choose my presence wisely, and above all, cease permitting individuals committed to misunderstanding me to dictate the narrative of my life. The version of me they discuss is obsolete, and truthfully, they miss that version because it bolstered their security amidst their own lack of progress. But I have work ahead. I have a future to embrace. Let them retain their stories if necessary, and I will continue my forward journey. I am not who I once was, and that is precisely the essence of it all. Number 3, they fear your advancement. A peculiar form of opposition arises not from adversaries, but from individuals I anticipated would champion my development. And when someone persistently dredges up my past, one of the most unsettling motivations is a deep-seated fear of the person I'm evolving into. It isn't that they fail to perceive my transformation, it's that my transformation makes them uneasy. They are stagnant while I am progressing, and nothing highlights stagnation quite like witnessing someone close begin to ascend. Growth inherently disrupts. It alters routines, challenges group dynamics, and compels others towards self-reassessment. When I commence evolving, developing greater self-awareness, confidence, success, inner peace, my progress doesn't invariably inspire those around me. Occasionally, it intimidates them because my change confronts their established comfort zone. It forces them to ponder, why haven't I progressed? And most individuals prefer avoiding that uncomfortable question. So instead, they resort to the next simplest course, attempting to pull me back. That is the reason they reference my former self. Not for reminiscence, not out of genuine care, but because the version of me that struggled provided them a sense of security in remaining unchanged. It was familiar. It posed no challenge to their self-perception. And if they can sufficiently remind me of my flaws, failures, darkest moments, perhaps they can convince themselves and me that I haven't truly changed, that genuine growth isn't occurring, and therefore they needn't embark on their own journey. This precise scenario happened to someone I know, a woman named Nicole. During her early 20s, she grappled with depression, lived precariously from paycheck to paycheck, and endured cycles of toxic relationships that left her depleted and ashamed. But she undertook the arduous work. She engaged in therapy. She achieved sobriety, both emotionally and physically. She began establishing boundaries. She started constructing a life founded on peace, structure, and purpose. Yet, each visit to her hometown brought encounters with old friends determined to drag her back into outdated narratives. They would jest about nights she couldn't recall, mock her past romantic choices, or remind her of jobs from which she'd been dismissed. Superficially, it resembled teasing, but Nicole recognized the underlying pattern. They never inquired about her new business venture. They showed no interest in hearing about her current life. They simply replayed her most difficult chapters as if that were the only version of her they could accept. And that's when the Stoic wisdom resonated. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The one who seeks your past fears your present power." Nicole realized these friends weren't oblivious to her progress. They felt threatened by it. Her stability underscored their chaos. Her discipline highlighted their apathy. Her transformation disrupted the role they had designated for her within their social structure. And rather than evolving alongside her, they attempted to keep her constrained. So she ceased participating in their dynamic. She didn't engage in arguments. She didn't strive to prove anything. She simply denied them access to the new iteration of herself they resisted meeting. She moved forward, not propelled by bitterness but by clarity. Because here lies the truth. When someone fears my growth, they will exert every effort to diminish it, reducing it to a jest, a memory, a cautionary tale. But Stoicism reminds us that our peace and progress are ours to safeguard. I owe no one the comfort derived from my stagnation. I need not diminish myself to spare others confrontation with their own reflection. I must continue ascending, even if it induces discomfort in others, especially then. Number 4. They refuse to acknowledge the new you. One of the most disheartening trials encountered on the path of personal development is the realization that certain individuals will persistently refuse to accept the transformed me. I've undertaken the internal labor. I've confronted the pain, the uncertainties, the long nights dedicated to self-examination. I've reconstructed myself from the core outwards, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And yet, individuals persist in my life who insist on interacting with me as though none of that transformation ever transpired. They address me with the same former condescension, jest about outdated flaws I've overcome, and behave as if my evolution is merely a performance rather than a genuine reality. This isn't rooted in their inability to perceive the change. It stems from their unwillingness to acknowledge it. What I'm observing isn't ignorance, it's resistance. My former self fulfilled a role that maintained their comfort. Perhaps I was the perpetual recipient of assistance, the silent one, the individual who never established boundaries. Now that I've embraced my personal power, the dynamic between us has been disrupted, and rather than adapting, they cling tenaciously to the past. Why? Because accepting my evolution would necessitate reframing their perception of me and, more significantly, their perception of themselves. Change induces discomfort. Growth prompts confrontation, and for many, denying my progress proves easier than questioning their own inertia. This pattern is both prevalent and profoundly damaging. Consider someone like Robert Downey Jr. For years, his public persona was defined less by his acting prowess and more by his widely publicized struggles with addiction, arrests, and unpredictable behavior. He reached rock bottom under the global spotlight, yet through discipline, therapy, accountability, and an unwavering dedication to change, he transformed not only his public image, but his entire life. He returned to Hollywood not as a cautionary figure, but as one of its most celebrated leading actors. Nevertheless, for years following his resurgence, critics persisted who could not relinquish the past, insisting on defining him by his failures rather than his progress. What they genuinely resisted was the challenge his redemption posed to their established narrative, because if someone like him possessed the capacity for change, it implied they lacked justification for their own stagnation. Stoicism provides precise guidance for navigating these moments. Epictetus stated, "You are not bound to who you were. Grow with reason and let the past be dust." That isn't merely elegant philosophy. It serves as a practical guide for survival. I owe no one the persistence of my former self, regardless of their familiarity with it. My growth does not constitute betrayal. It isn't arrogance. It isn't rejection. It simply reflects the courage I possess to evolve while others prioritized comfort over clarity. So, what course of action should I take when people refuse to accept the current me? I cease performing. I stop seeking validation from those who have predetermined the scope of my identity. I allow my actions to speak and my boundaries to instruct. I refrain from explaining my transformation and instead begin safeguarding it. Because the truth is this: Some individuals will never truly meet the transformed me because they remain too invested in misunderstanding me. And that burden rests with them, not with me. I must continue progressing forward, continue evolving. Let those incapable of rising alongside me remain where they are situated. Growth requires no applause. It solely necessitates authenticity. Number 5. They disrespect your journey. One of the most definitive indications that someone lacks genuine respect for me is their persistent reduction of my identity to a version of myself I have already surpassed. It matters little how significantly I've changed, the internal struggles confronted, the discipline cultivated, or the sacrifices made to become my present self. For certain individuals, none of this holds relevance because they have predetermined my identity, deciding it remains smaller than the person I've evolved into. They remain fixated on the chapter marked by stumbles, failures, or periods of uncertainty, and regardless of the distance traveled since then, they refuse to acknowledge progress. This type of behavior isn't motivated by love, care, or even honesty. It stems from a need for comfort. They feel secure when I remain confined to a version of myself that is simpler to control, ridicule, or predict. Growth necessitates acknowledgement, and acknowledgement demands humility. It requires them to concede, "You've changed, and I didn't foresee that." Or, more challengingly, "You've surpassed me." And most individuals lack the capacity for such admissions. Instead, they anchor me to the nadir of my personal history and portray it as the complete narrative. Not because it aligns with truth, but because it fulfills their need to feel superior, or at minimum, secure. Consider someone like Matthew Perry. For years, he publicly contended with addiction. His lowest points were sensationalized in tabloids and gossip columns. Yet beyond the headlines, he was actively rebuilding himself through recovery, self-reflection, service to others, and years of dedicated inner work. Nevertheless, for many, he remained perpetually defined as the individual unable to maintain stability. Even as he authored books, assisted others through their own recovery journeys, and spoke candidly about mental health, the world often preferred viewing him through the prism of his most difficult years, because perceiving him clearly would necessitate abandoning the comfort associated with that outdated image. It would mean acknowledging a man who refused to remain broken, thereby threatening anyone choosing not to rise themselves. This is where Stoic wisdom offers a potent compass. Marcus Aurelius stated, "Judge not the man by his past, but by the direction of his stride." In other words, significance lies not in origins, but in trajectory. Genuine respect isn't about pretending past mistakes never occurred. It involves honoring the strength required to overcome them. If someone fails to recognize that, it isn't my responsibility to force their perspective. My responsibility is to continue moving forward. When someone refuses to respect my journey, I owe them no justifications. I need not regress my progress to accommodate their comfort level. Their refusal to acknowledge my evolution speaks volumes about them, not about me. If they cannot accept the current version of me, it indicates their continued investment in a reality where diminishing me felt easier. That burden is not mine to bear. Therefore, I must protect my personal space, conserve my energy, and advance without guilt. I did not endure everything encountered merely to be confined by someone else's restricted view of my past. I earned my evolution, and the path forward belongs to me, not to those fixated on who I used to be. If you found these insights valuable, let me know by commenting yes below. Your thoughts matter, and I'd love to hear from you. Number 6. They desire to keep you stagnant. One of the most insidious methods employed to control me involves weaponizing my past. Not for understanding, not for facilitating healing, but for perpetuating my entanglement within it. Their objective isn't growth, it's stagnation. Consequently, they twist memory into a restraint, pulling me back each time I attempt forward movement. Whenever I demonstrate strength, they subtly introduce reminders of past weaknesses. Each time I assert a new aspect of myself, they resurrect the former iteration. Not motivated by care, but because keeping me diminished preserves their perceived power. This isn't love. It isn't concern. It's manipulation disguised as recollection. When someone persistently brings up my past, particularly the aspects I've diligently worked to transcend, they are effectively attempting to instill feelings of guilt. And guilt, especially when unmerited, constitutes one of the most profoundly paralyzing forces. Because guilt doesn't merely induce negative feelings about past actions, it fosters doubt regarding my very right to be my present self. That doubt transforms into a silent form of imprisonment. I begin to hesitate. My voice lowers slightly. My pace slackens. I start to contract, not due to any wrongdoing, but because someone else requires my diminishment to maintain their sense of control. This is where Stoic wisdom provides clarity. Epictetus wrote, "Guilt unearned is a chain forged by manipulation, That statement should resonate deeply within my soul. Not all guilt originates from within. Some is imposed by individuals aware that as long as I carry shame, I will remain subdued. I won't ascend too rapidly. I won't speak too assertively. And I won't reach too far, having been persuaded that I am undeserving, that I haven't earned it, that redemption remains unattainable. But the truth remains. My past might explain my origins, but it does not dictate my destination. Consider someone like Jamie Lee Curtis. For years, her struggles with addiction and insecurity formed part of her public narrative. Yet, they didn't define its conclusion. Through discipline, honesty, and self-awareness, she transmuted that pain into purpose. Nevertheless, even presently, individuals sometimes reference her past as though it should eclipse her current reality. But it doesn't, because she no longer bears the guilt of a story she has already rewritten. That represents the crucial shift. Understanding that my growth requires no external permission. If someone persists in highlighting my lowest point, it isn't because they value truth. It's because they've constructed a self-perception reliant upon my inability to progress. And the moment I cease playing their game, their perceived power begins to erode. Let it crumble. I owe no one the comfort derived from my stagnation. Real accountability fosters evolution, not silence. I've taken ownership of my past. I've done the necessary work. And if someone still attempts to confine me within my former self, it reflects their fear, not my reality. So I must cast off the chains they've attempted to forge. I've endured their tactics long enough. The time has come to rise. Not because I've forgotten my past, but because I finally comprehend its inability to dictate my future. I must release what no longer serves me and stride forward as though my life depends upon it. Because in truth, it does. Number 7, they are testing your emotional vulnerabilities. There exists a specific reason certain individuals persistently reference my past, and it isn't always rooted in care or a desire for resolution. Occasionally, it's a form of testing. They aren't seeking understanding, they're seeking a reaction. It's calculated, subtle, and strategic. They aim to ascertain if the wounds remain sensitive, if shame still holds sway, if residual guilt persists. When they allude to my past, it isn't about reminiscing. It's about probing emotional scar tissue to gauge lingering pain. And if pain remains, they've discovered a potential weapon. This represents one of the most manipulative forms of control, often disguised rather than overt aggression. It manifests through jokes, seemingly innocuous comments, or offhand remarks appearing too pointed to be coincidental. They aren't testing my memory. They're testing my growth. They seek to determine if I will flinch, become defensive, or revert to old patterns merely to prove I've changed. Because if they can provoke me, they can still access the version of me that no longer exists. And for some individuals, that constitutes sufficient leverage to feel they maintain influence. It's a psychological game founded upon insecurity. When someone feels threatened by my current self, they attempt to lure me back towards my former self. They achieve this by trying to trigger old emotional responses. They require no shouting or arguing. Merely getting under my skin suffices. If they succeed in causing me to lose control, even momentarily, they can claim a false sense of superiority, not through personal growth, but by successfully pulling me down. This is where Stoicism provides the strongest defense. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "He who cannot be provoked holds the highest power." That transcends mere philosophy. It embodies psychological mastery. Because when someone attempts provocation and I remain unmoved, when they cast bait and I refuse to bite, I reclaim all the perceived power they held. Emotional stillness becomes the most potent declaration of growth. Consider someone like Serena Williams. Throughout her illustrious career, she encountered incessant criticism. Some subtly veiled, others overtly blatant. Commentators, rivals, even the public frequently questioned her temperament, past outbursts, and her right to dominance. However, as she matured, she ceased expending energy on verbal self-defense. She embodied discipline. She intensified her training, deepened her focus, and allowed her silence and composure to resonate more profoundly than any argument. She stopped reacting, and consequently they eventually ceased testing her. That serves as the model. When someone brings up my past seeking a reaction, I should not meet them with justifications. Offer no proof. Refuse to surrender my peace to someone attempting its disruption. Let them speak. Let them attempt provocation. And then allow them to confront the discomfort of my calm demeanor. My growth isn't validated through argument. It's validated through presence, control, and restraint. The more I master the ability to remain unmoved by provocations, the more invulnerable I become. That isn't avoidance, it's elevation. And when those testing me realize they can no longer access the old emotional triggers, they will either cease their attempts or fade away. I have outgrown the version of myself compelled to react to everything. Now is the time to embody the version requiring no reaction. Because true power resides in stillness, not silence born of fear, but silence born of strength. If they persist in referencing my past, it doesn't reflect who I am. It reflects who they need me to be to avoid confronting their own lack of growth. But I am no longer confined there. I've done the work. I've endured hardship for my evolution. I've outgrown the restraints they still attempt to fasten around my ankles. And here lies the truth. I owe no one an explanation for my healing. I need not diminish myself merely to fit the version of me they find comfortable remembering. Let them talk. Let them doubt. Let them cling tenaciously to a chapter I have already concluded. Because while they remain fixated on rereading old lines, I am actively authoring new ones. So here is my challenge. Cease looking backward to appease those who never learned how to look forward. Stand firmly in my present, own my peace, and walk forward with the calm power of someone who no longer flinches when the past attempts to intrude. If this video resonated deeply within me, I should share it with someone who might benefit from this reminder. Hit that like button, and remember to subscribe for more profound, soul-stirring Stoic wisdom. I am not defined by my past. I am defined by my next chapter. Let's continue this growth